All right. Camera speeding, sound speeding.
It's happening. Hello, Kurt. Hey, and hello, Internet. Hello, everyone who's tuning in. My name is Tony Bacigalupo, and I'm sitting here with Kurt Peloquin, who is one of the founders and creators of this. Founders, not the right word, but one of the originators of this amazing program called Poetry Lunch. And Kurt, I'm just so grateful to have you here on the program.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, it's been great to get to know you through Poetry Lunch. And as you mentioned, I'm one of the co-conspirators. Jerome Hugh is one of the founders as well at Prime Produce, where we host the weekly Poetry Lunch, and it's really cool to talk to you, as
And
always.
remind us what's poetry, what's Prime Produce.
So Prime Produce is an apprenticeship cooperative built by people who want to make the world a better place through service and hospitality. And it's in Hell's Kitchen, New York City. And there's a few different floors, co-working space, event space, rooftop garden, and meditation room.
And so much more.
So much more. Yeah,
It's a
artist in
magical, magical
residency
place.
program. Yeah, it's really great. And so we meet there every Wednesday at 12:30, and for our poetry lunch. We've been doing that for over 2 years now.
Incredible. And I started coming to Poetry Lunch, I think it was around the end of the summer, and I believe that's how we first met. I had been a fan of Prime Produce for a while, having come from the co-working world. And I've used Poetry Lunch as an example of what I'm trying to do as far as spreading the good word about like awesome programs anybody can do anywhere. In part because it is, I think, such a perfect encapsulation of so much of what we're talking about, where it's incredibly simple. You say the phrase poetry lunch and then say, like, what do you think that means? And the person's probably going to be right.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's just self-explanatory, but the level of depth that it can go in terms of connection it can go really deep really fast in terms of people connecting. So I want to get into all of that. We're getting philosophical, but first tell me a little bit about your background and your story. We don't want I want to document your whole life one day, but like maybe just in short, the story of your journey that led you to starting Poetry Lunch, and what was it like getting that started in the beginning?
Yeah. So I was born on July 30. No, I'm kidding. um, so I've been in the professional world for the past 15 years, starting in finance and advertising, and I always had the heart of an artist. I loved. I got into poetry through rap battles in college, and Curtis Flow was my alias. um,
Please
and it was something
tell
I
me there
always,
are videos somewhere.
I we've got to track some of them down. I came in second place in MTV Cancun freestyle battle in 2002. Only my ex-girlfriend has some of those photos. Um, but that's a segue. So it was something I always kind of like kept to myself, brought out at parties, and and very much felt like I had to hide it from my daily life at work. Up until the point where it felt like it was time to start sharing it, um, and so during that evolution of myself, I found a great therapist. I learned to meditate, and so the freestyles or poems that I was creating were kind of channeling these lessons that had helped me. And I started bringing it into schools and using poetry as a tool to help people open up and to share their voices with each other and their stories. And so, and the results were incredible. And I started doing that with kids and with veterans, and then one day I was at Prime Produce with one of the founders, Chris Chavez, and a few other folks were joining us for lunch. And I was working on a poem that I was going to perform. And I asked them if they'd like to hear it. And so I shared the poem, and all of a sudden, four or five strangers just dove into some of the deepest subjects that, pull at our heartstrings. And we were both like, after lunch, like, whoa, what just happened there? And we realized that poetry, broadly defined, can really propel people into a deep sense of connection with each other. And we decided to just continue meeting for lunch and sharing poems. And and that's kind of the journey that led to the start of Poetry Lunch.
I love the fact that it was kind of accidental. I mean, there
Yeah,
was this moment for you where you had been building up to the point where you felt like you were ready to share your voice, and that it was through all of this inner work that you had been doing that led you to that point. But then once you actually just kind of pulled the cap off of the bottle, it was a very innocuous little move, but all of a sudden it connected to other people who happened to be within earshot, right?
yeah, yeah,
And then they also opened up,
yeah,
and then you knew that you were onto something immediately, I imagine.
yeah, yeah. It's as you know, it's a really special experience when people have the space to share something that speaks to their, who they are at their core. And I think one of the things that makes Poetry Lunch work is that we define poetry super broadly. And because I don't have any formal training in poetry, that's kind of just been my natural way of approaching it. Like, I found poetry through hip hop, and I feel that because we give people that caveat when they come to lunch, that anything goes, that a poem could be a movie trailer you found, or it could be a song that you were listening to on the way over, or a quote that you love. It really kind of lowers the bar, and people, um, can even show up and just speak their minds in the moment. Because really, the goal of it is to have a deeper conversation, to break our routines, and to connect with each other.
Yeah, and I think that that's an important message too. That broadly defined, I think, is one of the most important pieces of language in this recipe
Yeah.
of this poetry lunch, because it lowers that barrier. I feel like when if I didn't experience it firsthand, if I didn't know the culture of poetry of prime produce, I would have thought, oh man, I'm not a poet. I'm not like I don't write stuff that's really like deep and flowery and whatever. Like I don't really identify like that. But then when I went, and the first several times I didn't write anything. I didn't share anything. I just watched, right? And there were people like Albert who would tell a story, and
Hmm.
he would be making it up on the spot, or maybe he had kind of an inkling, but just the rhythm and the cadence and the creativity of his storytelling was so captivating that we were all inspired, and actually shifted the way that I started writing. It shifted the way other people started writing. Where I remember when he told one story that the next poetry lunch people came in and there was more contribution and different kinds of contributions. And so
Yeah.
I feel like this idea of creating a place where we're not trying to prove something, we're not trying to one up each other or show off, how sophisticated we are. We're
Yeah.
just trying to explore how to express ourselves in any way that makes sense to us. Creating that expectation, I think, really helped make it an accessible thing to maybe people who are not normally identifying as poets necessarily.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think, the as I've studied and, been teaching poetry and learning more about it, I learned about the roots of poetry. The word poeia means to make connection. And so in ancient Greece, there was many different types of poetry. There was poetry using myth, mythopoeia, poetry using song, melopoeia, and all these different sort of ways that people, used their voices to create connection. And so I love like that being the through line at lunch. And I love that it's at lunch too, because it's, it keeps it a little intimate, because, not everyone can break away at lunch. So it stays, rather well contained, and you're there's no, alcohol involved. Not that I'm against the drink every now and then, but it's something about just kind of being raw and present together in the middle of a day, maybe where we're kind of like we've been rushing around and doing our work and checking our emails, but we just come together for this hour and sit and see each other and listen. And there's no transactional element. There's no like, here's about me, here's what I do, here's what I'm, looking for. We introduce ourselves through our poems. Everyone writes an idea for a theme at the end, and then we move on. It's really a pretty simple
We
thing, but
introduce we introduce ourselves through our poems. I love that.
yeah, yeah,
Uh, take me through, like, just from a basic logistical standpoint. Take me through how Poetry Lunch works, and maybe your thought process behind some of the bits and pieces about how you do it.
yeah,
So, starting with the communication before the event happens, because that's a really important part of it as well.
yeah,
So, there's a newsletter you send out, and then walk me through it end to end.
yeah. So there's a newsletter where I send that out twice a week. Once, the week prior, and once the day before as a reminder. And it just says, here's our totally optional theme for the week is, you know, beauty is a power failure, or whatever, mice, or whatever weird theme we've picked from the theme jar. And then I explain the rules of Poetry Lunch, which are, here's the time. We show up Wednesdays, 12:30. Try to be on time. Pack a lunch and a poem. Although Jerome, our co-host, has been cooking now lately, so you can purchase a lunch at Prime Produce, and then bring a poem broadly defined. As I mentioned, anything goes: songs, stories, dance moves, doodles, and and that's it. And then I'll plug anything that's going on in our community if people have events or whatnot, and I'll share one picture encapsulating the view of what Poetry Lunch looks like, and a sampling of poems that were shared at the last lunch, with the invitation that if you can't make it, to host one of your own, or to send us a poem that we'll read aloud at lunch.
Awesome. And then so that's the email that goes out.
Yeah.
What I noticed too is that, and maybe this is just because you've kept things simple up to this point, but there's no real RSVP system. There's no Facebook event or Eventbrite. And there's no like brand or website for it. Maybe that will change over time. But do you think it's a deliberate choice that you're not making this a publicized kind of like formalized event?
I think it's like accidentally deliberate. It's um just being the nature of New York City living, being so busy and having hands in so many things. It's just kind of the organic nature of it has just been the way that we've organized it. I think having a website would be really nice, and I think we'll get around to that soon. Um, but I also really love the kind of word of mouth. you know there's no website, you kind of hear about it, and someone sends an intro to one of us, and we put you on the email list, and you show up. And there's a few guidelines that we have when people show up, that kind of you know we walk through the run of show, and we do icebreakers, and we kind of explain some little constraints that will help us to optimize the experience, which I can walk through. But yeah, it's just been one of those things that has organically evolved over time, and there it's kind of just been like, let's keep taping it together, because there's something special happening, and we don't really have the time to like formally brand it, and I kind of like that. Your audio, I can't hear your audio.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I like the fact that it's not something that's really publicized on like traditional platforms, and you're not like tweeting like, "Hey, everybody, come to poetry lunch," or whatever. It seems like I found something kind of sort of secret and magical,
Yeah,
and it's nice that the only way that I even know that it's happening is because I happen to be lucky enough to come across it and then get onto your newsletter. And so if I didn't get your newsletter, I wouldn't know what's happening, and I think that creates a sense of specialness to it. Because a lot of people that I talk to when they're trying to build community, they put these blockers in front of them where they say like,
mhm,
"Oh, I want to start this new thing," but like I'm all caught up trying to pick a WordPress theme for my website, or I don't know what to name it, so I don't know what domain name to buy. And I'm like, dude, like no, 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 we don't worry about that stuff right now. Like
yeah,
just do it. Like text a few friends and make it happen. And I
yeah,
just
yeah,
like that you've been doing this 2 years, and it's been terrific without any of that stuff.
yeah,
So
yeah.
take
It really has.
sorry, go ahead. So take me through the welcome introductions, and
Yeah,
how you facilitate the management of the people reading their poems
sure,
and their feedback.
sure. So yeah, so we'll show up at lunch at 12:30, and we'll all sit down at the table together, and then either myself or Jerome or one of the participants who's been coming for a while will kind of just explain for newcomers what poetry lunch is. So something like, welcome to poetry lunch. This is a weekly ritual where we gather together to share poems broadly defined. Anything goes. We've had uh, clips from the movie Talladega Nights. We've had dance routines. We've had original songs and original poems, found poems. Anything goes. Anything that feels like it connects to you in the moment that you want to share is totally welcome. Sharing is also optional. Listening is participating. And the real reason we're here is to connect with each other. And so we try to keep poems to a maximum of 4 minutes, so that we can encourage the conversation between the poetry. Um, and then I usually ask if did I forget anything, and uh, and I don't think I did. And then we do a short icebreaker, so which we make up every week, which is just introduce yourself and say something related to the totally, oh yes, I did miss something. So the totally optional theme for the week, which is drawn from the poetry theme jar, uh, we'll say that theme, and then at the end of lunch, everyone has a chance to write an idea for a theme, and so that's where the themes continue to accumulate. Um, and so then we just open up the floor and we say, who wants to kick us off? And there's usually, after we do the icebreaker, so an example of an icebreaker might be, you know, um, where do you like to go to connect with yourself? Or, what's your superpower? Things like that. And then we'll just open up the floor and say, who wants to share? And usually there's a moment of silence where kind of people are like, whoa, like, can just share now. And so we kind of like intentionally just kind of create that space and sit in it together until someone has the courage to share something. And so everyone is super present for the people sharing, and um, and then we kind of encourage the conversation just to arise out of what was shared and to take us as we go. And me being one of the facilitators, I'll keep an eye on time, and just kind of interject whenever if someone's maybe sharing a bit longer than the 4 minute mark, or we just kind of like take a pause and say, hey, just want to be mindful of time, make sure everyone has a chance to share, um, and we see where the conversation leads. And then as we wrap things up, uh, we'll take the sticky pads out of the jar and a bunch of pens and pass them around the table, and everyone has a chance to write an idea for a theme for next week, which could be something that you're currently curious about. It could be a word or a sentence that, came to you during listening to poems at lunch, or something that you'd like to explore in the following week. Could be a doodle, could be anything. And then we fold that into a square, usually with the sticky side up so that it closes. We put it in the jar, and then we usually have a tradition. If you're new to Poetry Lunch, you get to pick the theme for the following week. And so, and while that's happening, I usually snap a few photos of the group, and then we wrap up the lunch.
I love that there's so many little rituals that are
Yeah,
not complicated, and they're not overly ritualistic.
yeah,
We're not like joining hands in prayer and chanting something. Like, it's just like, hey, write down a word on a sticky note and stick it in the thing. Who's the
yeah,
newest person here? Oh, it's your first time. Go stick your hand in the bucket and pull out a theme. But just that idea of like, there's a little bit of drama
yeah,
that, having been in this situation, I know that the word that gets pulled out of that jar is going to be stuck in my head for the next week, and
yeah,
that's going to shape my creative prompt and challenge. There's a tension to it. I mean, it's
yeah,
really incredible how such a simple thing can carry such weight. But the idea of just pulling one word out of the jar, and then it's weavers,
yeah,
or mice or asteroids out of nowhere, right? And it's so funny because I know in that moment, my head, all these dominoes start going down in my head of like, oh, that's an awful word. Actually, no, wait, it's a great word. I think I could do something with it. Well, I don't know,
yeah,
maybe. And then that's my brain for the next week while I'm thinking on
yeah,
that theme. And the fact that we're all in it together. And
yeah,
there's almost kind of this fun, like, oh, I wonder where Kurt's going to go with this word. And I can already
yeah,
picture your style of that word, and how you're going to do it.
yeah,
And really, I think that also creates um, a sense of continuity between programs, that at the end of one, you're kind of creating a cliffhanger for the sequel every time, right?
mm,
Where
yeah,
it's like, ooh, tune in next time to see how the Poetry Lunch crew tackles this crazy word.
yeah,
Um, and so it creates that tension of, don't you want to come back and see how this
right.
story continues? And I
Yeah.
think that that's really helpful as well. Um,
Yeah, I think also too, I just, you're making me think, and one thing I love about it that I've seen happen and blossom over the years is that, um, you know, because poetry is broadly defined, we talked about this, there's that permission for people who don't identify as poets to share their art. And I've just watched people blossom in their creative lives, to the point of like hosting massive one woman shows, you creating a Spotify channel with your original music, um, you know, Albert coming in and like telling these improv stories, and, you know, Abby writing her book now. And um, it's really, it's incredible to see, as someone who felt stifled as an artist growing up and had to like do a lot of work to reclaim that. It's such a joy to be able to give that gift to people, to have a safe space to feel like they can share their voices, and be creative and reclaim that childlike wonder. So that's probably one of my favorite things about it.
Childlike wonder, which was also one of the themes that we had
Yes.
not too long ago.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm realizing, as I'm also kind of going to segue into the later portion of our conversation about how people can kind of take this and run with this, but I'm also realizing the simplicity of it, that it really requires very, very little to do, and that you could do
Mm-hmm.
it pretty much anywhere. You need just basically a semi-private or enclosed space, quiet enough that you can hear each other. Essentially, it
Mm-hmm.
could be, you could easily do it in a restaurant, or cafe. You do it in a home. But I'm realizing, like, people could even do this in the workplace. Like, I could book a conference room at my job and
For
just have
sure.
a few of my coworkers do it on a lunch break, right?
Yeah.
Nothing really. So just transitioning into that like taking action, somebody listening to this could take this idea and run with it right now. I mean, there's no need to think more about it, but we are going to create some resources to share so that you can sign up, get a bit of a head start. So imagining that happening, that somebody who is tuning into this is like, okay, I think I want to do this. I'm a little bit nervous. Maybe I'm ready to go. Maybe this person's already like, punching up the email. What tips would you give them in anticipation of the fact that they might be hosting their first poetry lunch coming up?
Mm.
Like what would you tell that you haven't already mentioned that you've like designed for in the way that it's programmed?
I think it's keep it light, like do less, like just get together with pick a theme, something that you're curious about, and say, "Hey, we're gonna get together for a poetry lunch." Poetry is super broadly defined. I'm probably gonna bring whatever you're gonna bring. Maybe it's a quote, maybe it's something that you remember from your childhood, maybe it's a song, to really just show how broad poetry can be by modeling that. Will give people permission to kind of be like, okay, I'm not so intimidated by the word poetry, which there can be a stigma around that. So I think like lowering that barrier to entry and starting really small. For a long time when we got started, it was me, Chris, and Jerome, or just like me and Jerome, and one other person. Um, and but the consistency of that, like I loved those lunches because it was just like, okay, like I'm gonna see you every week. Like for me, it's created such a sense of belonging, of knowing that I have a place to go once a week. We don't always make it. Sometimes we postpone the lunch, if people can't host or things come up. But that frequency of seeing the same people and doing something that's so genuine has changed my life, you know? So that would be the second tip is to commit, to just find a time once a week and create this rhythm. And you'll be amazed by how that deepens your sense of friendship with whoever you're doing this with, um, and just your overall like joy in your life.
Nice word, joy.
Yeah.
And we could also say that on the lowering the barrier front, people bring really short poems. Jillian
Hmm.
has written, it's like she'll come in and she'll read a couple of 3-line poems that she wrote that are just super quick and short and poignant. Some people read other poetry that they found while researching the topic, right? So
Hmm.
there's lots of ways to like make it less scary for people.
Yeah.
So that's great.
Yeah.
And so just finally, where are you going next in terms of poetry lunch or just other creative pursuits? Um, and where do people find you? Where do people find out more about what you have to offer in the world?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So poetry lunch, this is really, thank you for motivating me to talk about it. It's been the goal since day one to just like have people host these and create community, in cities and countries around the world. And so I think the goal is to do just this, to package it so that it's really easy for people to just take it and run with it on their own. So poetry, we've got poetrylunch.com, poetrylunch.org, and so stay tuned for that coming up soon as I get an afternoon off. um, and uh, and for me, in my information, you can find me my full name, Kurt Peloquin, KurtPeloquin. It's super easy to remember. So kurtpeloquin.com, Kurt Peloquin on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, all those things. And and yeah, I thought maybe it could be interesting to share a quick poem from one of the poetry lunches, if
Oh
you're
my
open to it.
goodness, Kurt. That's brilliant. You're the best. All right, make it
So,
happen, man.
yeah,
We'll close it out on that. I love it.
great. So let me find the one that I was thinking of.
While you're looking it up, I should also mention to the audience, Kurt actually created a little, what do you call it? Like a little zine of your
Yeah, a little
poems
chat
with,
book.
yeah.
Yep. Yeah, it's called Childish Things, and you can find it on my website, kurtpeloquin.com.
Nice.
So, wow, I'm just going back through all these poems. It's just like amazing to see all these lunches. Um, and the one I'm looking for, let's see.
I'm also going to
So,
say, Kurt, while you're looking, that the guitars in the background are really getting me thinking that one day we should make a song together. Just
yes,
saying.
absolutely. So, this was the first poetry lunch of 2020, and the theme was asteroids from out of nowhere.
Oh, I love this theme.
And the poem goes like this. Sometimes a plan is a groggy robe kind of morning, dry mouthed salutation where the coffee isn't strong enough to remind you of your own mortality, so you linger in your body of refuge like a feather falling from your grandfather's cap. Benny Goodman tooting on the turntables, shoveling breakfast sausage and gluten-free business plans into your mouth, calculating the expiration date of infinity, wearing your jaw of armor to remind yourself of a battle you'd rather not remember, or another one you'd rather not face. When asteroids from out of nowhere land on your dinosaurs, and a million years is just enough time to forget all the weapons you've worn, to believe you were something separate from the all of this exact moment. And you inhale, and you listen through your eyes to a friend singing his prayers into a room made for loving. You feel your body wrapped in your fabric. You taste the fair trade coffee inside your cheeks, a crescent smile of nothing at once. Your heart never asked for permission to make a song of this life. Neither should you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt. That was
My
beautiful.
pleasure. Thanks a lot, Tony.
I'm like conditioned to be going into feedback mode and conversation mode with you now. It's like, great.
Yeah.
Kurt, thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to sit with me and go through all of this. I'm very excited to be sharing this story with more folks. And I'm very excited to see who responds to this by starting something. And
Yeah.
so if you're tuning into this and you're thinking you want to get something going, please let us know. Register, get the resources that we're sharing through the links that are attached to this program. But regardless, let us know how this lands for you. This is all very new for us, so we want to hear from you, and we want to know what's happening out there. And if you go and make magic in your world through poetry, then let's share in those stories together.
Yeah. And one other thing I'll mention is while we get the website up, if you do want to attend one of our poetry lunches, you can email poetrylunch@primeproduce.coop.
Poetrylunch@primeproduce.coop. There you go.
Awesome.
Awesome. Kurt, thank you so much. I'm really grateful for your time, and I'll see you at poetry.
Yeah,
Lunch.
man. See you at poetry lunch. Looking forward to it. Thanks so much, Tony.
All right. All right.
Bye.
You got it, man. Okay, I stopped the recording.